What if everything you believed about One Piece was a lie? What if the story you've been following for decades isn't actually about adventure, friendship, and achieving your dreams? What if it's actually about something much darker, much more devastating, and much more real than you ever imagined? There's a theory about One Piece that changes everything. And I mean everything. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It recontextualizes every arc, every character, every moment of joy and triumph in the series. This theory suggests that One Piece isn't the uplifting story of a boy achieving his dreams. It's actually a tragic meditation on how we use fantasy to cope with trauma. And if this theory is correct, it will completely destroy how you see not just One Piece, but storytelling itself. If this kind of deep dive into anime philosophy interests you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. And I'm curious, what's your take on dark theories that reinterpret beloved stories? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Here's the theory that will ruin One Piece for you. Everything after Chapter 1 is happening inside Luffy's mind while he's in a coma. The entire Grand Line adventure is an elaborate fantasy his brain is creating to cope with a traumatic reality. Think about it. A rubber boy who can't swim becomes a pirate in a world made mostly of water. He gains a crew of misfits who all perfectly complement his weaknesses and accept him unconditionally. He faces challenges that seem impossible but always finds a way to overcome them through sheer willpower and the power of friendship. Sounds like the wish fulfillment fantasy of a traumatized child, doesn't it? The theory suggests that Luffy suffered some catastrophic injury or trauma early in his life, possibly related to Shanks losing his arm, saving him, and has been unconscious ever since. His mind created this elaborate pirate adventure as a way to process his guilt, fear, and desire for acceptance. Once you start looking for evidence, it's everywhere. The world of One Piece operates on dream logic, not real-world physics. People survive injuries that should kill them. Emotions literally give you superpowers. The strong can defeat anyone through pure determination alone. Characters appear and disappear in ways that make more sense as mental constructs than real people. Notice how each crew member represents a different aspect of Luffy's personality or addresses a specific psychological need. Zoro represents his determination and willpower. Nami represents his practical intelligence. Usopp represents his fears and insecurities. Sanji represents his compassion and protective instincts. They're not separate people. They're different facets of Luffy's psyche, working together to help him process his trauma and maintain his sanity. The way One Piece storytelling works perfectly mirrors how dreams and coping fantasies function. Each arc follows the same basic pattern. Luffy and crew arrive somewhere new, discover people in distress, face a seemingly impossible challenge, and overcome it through friendship and determination. This isn't bad writing. It's how traumatized minds process and reprocess difficult experiences. The same themes, the same conflicts, the same resolutions, over and over again, each time making the dreamer feel a little more capable, a little more worthy, a little more loved. And notice how the stakes keep escalating in increasingly surreal ways. This is classic dream logic. The mind keeps creating bigger and bigger challenges to work through deeper and deeper layers of trauma and self-doubt. Every major villain in One Piece represents a different aspect of Luffy's trauma or self-doubt. They're not external enemies. They're internal demons he's fighting. Arlong represents fear and helplessness, the terror of being powerless to protect the people you care about. Crocodile represents cynicism and disillusionment, the fear that dreams are just lies we tell ourselves. Enel represents ego and God complex, the fear of becoming the very thing that hurt you. And what happens to these villains? They don't die. They're redeemed, transformed, or simply disappear. Because you can't kill parts of your own psyche, you can only integrate them or learn to live with them. Here's what's really disturbing about this theory. In the One Piece world, meaningful death is almost impossible. Characters who should die don't. Characters who appear to die come back. Even when someone does die, their will and dreams live on in others. This makes perfect sense if it's all happening in the mind of someone who's afraid of loss and abandonment. His fantasy world literally cannot allow the people he cares about to truly leave him. But what about characters like Ace? His death was devastating precisely because it was so rare in the One Piece world. The theory suggests that Ace's death represents Luffy's mind finally accepting some fundamental loss, possibly the loss of his own normal life, his own childhood, or his own future. The most heartbreaking aspect of this theory is that Luffy's fantasy world is so relentlessly optimistic. Every problem can be solved. Every enemy can be defeated. Every dream can be achieved. But what if this desperate optimism is itself a symptom of trauma? What if Luffy's mind is working overtime to create a reality where hope always wins because his real reality is too hopeless to bear? The very thing that makes One Piece beautiful, its unwavering belief in the power of dreams and friendship, becomes tragic when you realize it might be a coping mechanism for someone whose real world has failed them completely. There are so many elements of One Piece that only make sense as dream logic. Devil fruits that give you specific, thematically appropriate powers. A world where emotions and willpower literally alter reality. The fact that Luffy's rubber powers perfectly counter most threats he faces, almost like his mind is creating challenges he's equipped to handle. The way information reaches him at exactly the right moments. The way allies appear when he needs them most. The way every island he visits has people who desperately need exactly the kind of help he's capable of providing. It's not coincidence. It's a mind-creating scenarios where the dreamer gets to be the hero he wishes he could be in real life. If this theory is true, then One Piece isn't really about Luffy's journey to become Pirate King. It's about a traumatized person's mind desperately trying to maintain hope and meaning in the face of devastating reality. Every victory is hollow because it's not real. Every friendship is an illusion because it's just different aspects of his own psyche. Every dream achieved is meaningless because he's not actually achieving anything. He's just retreating further into fantasy. The real Luffy isn't becoming Pirate King. He's lying in a hospital bed or psychiatric facility, lost in a world of his own creation because reality became too much to bear. This theory is devastating because it reframes One Piece's greatest strength as its greatest tragedy. The series' celebration of dreams, friendship, and perseverance becomes a portrait of dissociation and denial. But here's what's really disturbing. Even if this theory is true, does it make One Piece less valuable? If these stories help someone cope with trauma, if they provide hope in hopeless situations, if they give meaning to meaningless suffering, does it matter if they're real? The theory forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of storytelling, reality, and mental health. Are escapist fantasies healthy coping mechanisms or dangerous delusions? When does hope become denial? When does dreaming become dissociation? But here's the really disturbing part. This theory doesn't just apply to One Piece. It could apply to any story, any dream, any hope we hold on to. How do you know that your own dreams and aspirations aren't just elaborate fantasies you've created to cope with realities you can't accept? How do you know that your relationships, your achievements, your sense of purpose aren't just comforting illusions? The One Piece Coma Theory holds up a mirror to our own lives and asks, what are you not willing to face? What fantasies are you using to avoid difficult truths? If Luffy is in a coma, would it be kinder to wake him up or let him dream? If his fantasy world gives him peace, purpose, and happiness, who are we to say that reality is better? This is the question that makes this theory so powerful and so disturbing. It suggests that sometimes the truth isn't what we need. Sometimes what we need is a beautiful lie that helps us survive. But it also asks, at what point does self-protection become self-deception? At what point does hope become delusion? The One Piece Coma Theory destroys your childhood because it takes everything pure and hopeful about the series and reveals it as potentially tragic and delusional. But maybe that's not entirely bad. Maybe recognizing the difference between healthy hope and escapist fantasy is important. Maybe understanding that our dreams might be coping mechanisms helps us engage with them more consciously. The theory doesn't prove that One Piece is really about a boy in a coma, but it does prove that any story can be reinterpreted through the lens of trauma, delusion, and psychological dysfunction. And that raises a crucial question. Does it matter if our dreams are real, as long as they help us survive and find meaning? Or does living in fantasy, no matter how beautiful, ultimately rob us of the chance to engage with authentic reality? I can't answer that for you, but I can tell you this. Once you've seen One Piece through this lens, you'll never look at any story the same way again. The question isn't whether Luffy is really in a coma. The question is, what realities are you avoiding by losing yourself in stories? And is that avoidance helping you or hurting you? Because in the end, we're all trying to find our own One Piece, some treasure that makes all the pain and struggle worthwhile. But maybe the real treasure isn't what we find at the end of our journey. Maybe it's having the courage to wake up and face reality, even when our dreams are more beautiful than anything the real world can offer.